At sunrise, Oklahoma's landscape transforms into a vast, golden sea. The prairies stretch endlessly toward the horizon, rolling gently into ancient riverbeds carved long before memory. The Wichita Mountains rise like stone guardians over the plains, their rugged silhouettes glowing against the dawn. It is a land open and exposed, yet beneath its simplicity lies one of North America's most unsettling archaeological mysteries. For more than 2 centuries, reports of gigantic human remains have surfaced across Oklahoma. Farmers plowing fields uncovered skulls too large for any known population. Early settlers described burial mounds built for bodies far taller than themselves. Newspapers from the 1800s and early 1900s documented skeletons measuring 7, 8, even 9 feet in length. Some were found with oversized weapons, stone hammers, spear points, and axes built for hands far larger than any modern humans. A few accounts even mention double rows of teeth or unusual bone structure, features described but quickly dismissed. Yet these discoveries do not stand alone. Indigenous tribes of the region, including the Wichita, Caddo, Comanche, Pawnee, and Osage, tell stories of ancient, giant people who lived in the plains before their arrival. Some legends speak of battles fought against them. Others describe them as powerful builders who raised mounds and carved stones long before the tribes inherited the land. These giants were said to be strong, territorial, and ultimately wiped out by catastrophe or divine intervention. Mainstream archaeology offers tidy explanations, mismeasurements, exaggerated reports, or confused interpretations of ancient burials. But the consistency of giant legends, paired with early eyewitness accounts, vanished artifacts, and mysterious burial sites, hints at something far older and more complex. Today, only fragments remain: eroded mounds, old newspaper clippings, scattered oral traditions, and bones that disappeared into private hands before they could be studied. Who were these beings? Why were they so large? And why does Oklahoma's soil hide their memory so completely? As dawn breaks over the prairies and shadows stretch across the forgotten mounds, one question echoes through the plains: who were Oklahoma's giants, and why did they vanish? According to mainstream archaeology, Oklahoma's human story unfolds neatly across thousands of years. The Paleo-Indians arrived first, hunting mammoth and bison along ancient river corridors. They were followed by archaic and woodland peoples, who built small burial mounds, traded widely, and left behind pottery, tools, and seasonal camps. Later came the Caddo, known for their elaborate ceremonial centers and finely crafted artifacts, and the Wichita, whose grasshouse villages filled the plains. The Osage controlled the eastern highlands, while the Comanche rode in from the west, dominating the southern plains with unmatched horsemanship. In the official narrative, these cultures account for every mound, artifact, and burial site found across Oklahoma. None of them were giants. None built structures for bodies larger than average human size. None crafted oversized tools meant for hands far bigger than their own. And certainly none described themselves as descendants of a towering race. But the land, and the historical record, refuses to stay within those boundaries. During the late 1800s and early 1900s, newspapers across Oklahoma documented repeated discoveries of giant skeletons. Farmers unearthed skulls as large as buckets. Railroad crews exposed burial sites containing femurs measuring far beyond normal human length. Amateur archaeologists described skeletons 7 to 9 feet tall, often buried in mounds far larger and deeper than typical woodland or cadone constructions. Some reports even included sketches of the finds before the bones were whisked away by collectors or institutions. Then there are the burial mounds themselves. While many match known native traditions, others do not. Some are disproportionately large for the population densities of the cultures attributed to them, others contain chamber-like constructions inconsistent with regional mound-building styles. A few, when excavated, revealed burial pits seemingly designed for bodies far longer than typical human proportions, pits too large for the average individuals found within. Indigenous oral traditions echo these discrepancies. The Wichita, Pawnee, Osage, and even neighboring plains tribes tell stories of the first people, a race of extraordinary height and strength who lived on the plains before their ancestors arrived. Some tales describe them as warriors. Others portray them as builders who raised mounds and earthworks now attributed to later cultures. Many stories end the same way: the giants vanished suddenly, through conflict, disease, or divine retribution. Adding to the mystery are the oversized artifacts found near mound sites, stone axes weighing far more than a normal human could swing effectively, spear points so large they seem impractical, and ceremonial objects too heavy for typical indigenous use. These items are often labeled ritual pieces, yet their dimensions hint at a different possibility, that they were designed for hands far larger than average. Mainstream archaeology maintains that such finds are misunderstandings, exaggerations, or mismeasurements. Yet the consistency across stories, reports, artifacts, and mound anomalies suggests otherwise. The official timeline of Oklahoma prehistory is clean, orderly, and comfortable. But scattered across the plains are puzzle pieces that don't fit, pieces scientists prefer to ignore because, when assembled, they point toward a chapter of history no one is prepared to acknowledge. Long before Oklahoma became a state, before archaeological regulations or modern museums, settlers, surveyors, and townspeople were already uncovering burials that defied explanation. These were not ordinary graves. They contained skeletons so large, so anomalous, that early witnesses struggled to describe them without invoking the word that still haunts Oklahoma's past: giants. The Red River giant burial. Some of the earliest reports come from the Red River region, where farmers plowing new fields struck wooden burial chambers buried beneath multiple layers of earth. Inside, they reportedly found skeletons measuring 7 to 9 feet in length, laid out with weapons far too large for average humans. Local newspapers of the late 1800s described skulls, the size of wash basins, along with femurs that measured longer than a man's entire arm. One account mentioned a skeleton found in a sitting position inside a stone-lined chamber, the chamber itself large enough to accommodate a person nearly 8 feet tall. Artifacts found nearby included a massive ceremonial axe and an intricately carved stone pendant that disappeared soon after the site was excavated. Residents swore the discovery was real. Authorities dismissed it as a misunderstanding. The Spiro Mound anomaly. Spiro Mound in eastern Oklahoma is famous for its Mississippian treasures, but buried beneath its grandeur is another, more troubling layer of history. Early, poorly documented digs in the 1910s and 1920s reported unusually large skeletal remains, including what some described as chiefs or elites of abnormal height. While official excavation notes emphasize typical Mississippian burials, local accounts recorded by workers claimed that a few skeletons stood out: longer bones, thickened skulls, and burial platforms that seemed oversized for the individuals the mound cultures are known to have buried. A handful of amateur archaeologists wrote privately about giant-class remains, but these notes never reached official publications. Rumors persist that some of these skeletons were removed quietly by collectors during the chaotic era of looting before the Spiro site was professionally protected. The Poteau dig reports near Poteau, early excavations for railroad construction exposed several burial mounds with chambers much larger than typical woodland or cadone structures. Workers reportedly uncovered skeletons measuring 8 to 10 feet long, along with spearheads the size of short swords. Local newspapers at the time published sketches showing elongated skulls with prominent brow ridges and unusually broad jawlines. When researchers attempted to revisit the site decades later, they found the burial mounds flattened, the artifacts gone, and records incomplete. Some skeletons were said to have been taken by railroad officials. Others allegedly ended up in private homes, displayed briefly before disappearing without trace. Patterns that can't be ignored. Skeptics argue that these accounts were products of exaggeration or poor measurement techniques. Yet the consistency across sources is impossible to overlook. Skulls described as exceptionally large, femurs far longer than average human proportions, burial chambers built on a scale not matching known cultures, weapons and tools too large for standard use. Newspapers from dozens of towns described similar finds, many years apart, in different regions, by unrelated witnesses. Most troubling of all is what happened to the remains. The vast majority vanished, shipped to museums that never catalogued them, taken by private collectors, lost during transportation, or simply untraceable due to poor early record-keeping. Some early archaeologists openly lamented the disappearances, noting that certain finds could have rewritten the history of the plains, if only they had survived long enough to be studied. Instead, what remains is a trail of reports, sketches, oral traditions, and fragments of evidence pointing toward a lost population physically unlike any known native group. A population Oklahoma has forgotten, or perhaps was encouraged to forget. Spiro Mound stands as one of the greatest ceremonial centers of ancient North America, a sprawling Mississippian-era city filled with elite burials, sacred iconography, and artifacts so exquisite they rival the treasures of Mesoamerica. Copper plates hammered into radiant sunburst patterns. Engraved conch shells depicting cosmological scenes. Beaded garments, ritual masks, and regalia that speak of a complex priestly order. Spiro was a cultural capital, a spiritual heart of the Mississippian world. But layered beneath its acknowledged history is a deeper, more unsettling mystery, one that archaeologists rarely discuss in public. Early excavators and looters in the 1910s and 1920s reported encountering oversized burial chambers within the main Craig Mound. These chambers were larger than typical Mississippian mortuary spaces, with some described as long enough to contain bodies stretching well over 7 feet. Though official documentation downplays this, local testimonies remain consistent: giant graves, elongated burial pits, and massive coffin-sized chambers that far exceed what would be necessary for average Mississippian individuals. Some artifacts unearthed from these chambers only heighten the mystery. Among them were ceremonial items that seem disproportionately large: enormous wooden staffs taller than most adult men, giant shell effigy engravings depicting towering human figures, oversized copper breastplates and regalia that appear too wide to fit the typical Mississippian physique, large stone maces and axe heads that would require enormous strength to wield. Mainstream explanations claim these items were symbolic, meant to represent mythic heroes or supernatural beings. Yet the careful craftsmanship of these objects, shaped for practical wear and use, suggests they were designed for actual bodies, not abstract rituals. Some of the most intriguing clues come from the giant effigy figures engraved on Spiro's conch shells. Several depict towering humanoid beings with elongated limbs, broad shoulders, and exaggerated height relative to surrounding figures. Scholars officially categorize them as gods, spirits, or warriors. But alternative researchers argue these depictions may reflect real individuals, elite rulers of unusual size whose physical presence inspired mythic memory. The looters who ravaged Spiro in the early 20th century left behind their own chilling stories. Several claimed they uncovered skeletons, too large for coffins, with skulls far bigger than any they had seen. One worker described a burial chamber where the leg bones nearly matched the height of the man holding them. These accounts rarely made it into academic reports, but they circulated widely through contemporary newspapers and personal diaries before fading into silence. Why silence? Because acknowledging giant remains within one of the most important Mississippian sites would shatter the clean cultural narrative archaeologists have spent decades building. Spiro is supposed to be the pinnacle of the Mississippian tradition, not a clue to an older, stranger lineage lurking beneath it. Yet some anomalies cannot be ignored. Certain ceremonial items are sized for individuals far larger than typical Mississippians. Some burial pits are vastly oversized compared to average skeletal remains. Giant effigies appear repeatedly in Spiro iconography. Local stories and looter testimony reference unusually tall skeletons removed before official excavations began. Taken together, these clues paint a provocative possibility. Spiro Mounds may not simply have been a ceremonial capital, it may have been a temple city built upon the legacy of an earlier giant people, or even a burial ground for their final leaders. Whether these giants lived alongside the Mississippians, preceded them, or were mythologized into their elite iconography remains uncertain. But the strange artifacts, oversized chambers, and persistent accounts of massive remains suggest that the history of Spiro, and the history of Oklahoma, runs far deeper and far stranger than anyone has dared to admit. Long before written history reached the plains, the tribes of Oklahoma carried with them stories of a people who towered above ordinary humans, giants who walked the land, fought wars, built structures, and vanished long before the first Europeans arrived. These accounts are not isolated myths. They appear again and again across tribes separated by language, location, and culture, forming one of the most haunting oral traditions in the region. The Wichita, the people of the tall trees. Among the Wichita, elders spoke of a race known as the people of the tall trees, beings so large they could walk through the forest without bending a branch. According to legend, these giants lived in the deep woodlands and river valleys long before the Wichita settled the plains. They were described as territorial but not inherently hostile, often keeping to their own enormous settlements. Some Wichita storytellers claimed the giants built mounds or fortified hills later reused by human tribes. Others insisted the tall ones disappeared after a great conflict or sudden catastrophe. The Osage, the ancient tall warriors. The Osage tell stories of ancient tall warriors who ruled the plains in an era so distant that the sun was younger. These giants were said to be fearsome fighters, able to wield weapons no ordinary person could lift. In some versions, the Osage ancestors encountered the remnants of these beings, bones embedded in riverbanks, enormous burial pits, and stone cairns large enough for bodies twice the size of a man. The Osage insisted these beings were real, not spirits, and that their presence shaped the land long before historical tribes emerged. The Comanche, the shining giants. Perhaps the most dramatic accounts come from the Comanche, who told stories of the shining giants, towering people with hair like firelight or bright faces that reflected the sun. Some versions describe them as travelers from distant lands, others portray them as semi-divine beings who descended into the plains before disappearing mysteriously. Comanche warriors claimed their ancestors fought these giants in a legendary battle, eventually driving them away or witnessing their extinction. These tales were passed down with striking consistency, suggesting they stem from ancient memory rather than creative storytelling. The Choctaw, Naholo, the pale giants. Among the Choctaw, the legends become even more specific. They spoke of the Naholo, pale-skinned giants who predated the tribes and inhabited Oklahoma's forests and hills. The Naholo were described as strong, intelligent, and often hostile. Older accounts say the Choctaw fought a great war against them, eventually exterminating or driving them out. The details echo surprisingly well with early settler reports of oversized human remains, creating a chilling alignment between myth and physical discovery. A shared memory across tribes. What makes these legends extraordinary is not their fantastical nature, but their remarkable consistency across unrelated cultures. Giants lived in Oklahoma long before known tribes. They were physically enormous, far beyond normal human height. They built structures or used mounds that tribes later occupied. Many tribes describe battles, coexistence, or encounters. These stories predate written records by centuries. Different peoples, different languages, same core narrative. Archaeologists often dismiss these tales as metaphors or cultural symbolism. Yet the convergence of myth, early newspaper accounts, oversized tools, and anomalous burial pits suggests something more profound, that the tribes may have been preserving collective memory of an ancient population that truly existed. If so, the tall ones were not mythic beings at all, but the last echoes of a forgotten chapter in Oklahoma's human history. Scattered across Oklahoma, in private collections, old homesteads, museum basements, and forgotten excavation notes, are artifacts that simply do not fit the physical proportions of any known ancient population. These objects are real, measurable, and impossible to ignore: tools, weapons, footwear, and even ceremonial items far too large for average-sized humans to use effectively. They form a quiet but undeniable archaeological riddle. Massive stone tools. Throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s, farmers and surveyors unearthed stone axes and mauls so large and heavy that a typical adult would struggle to lift them, let alone wield them with precision. Some weighed 12 to 20 pounds, far beyond the practical range for hunting tools made by Paleo Indians, Caddo, or Wichita craftsmen. These tools were carefully shaped, balanced, and polished, implying actual use, not ceremonial display. Mainstream archaeologists often suggest they were symbolic or ritual objects. But the wear patterns, smooth edges, repeated impact marks, indicate real, consistent use by someone strong enough to swing them. Extra-long spear points. Oklahoma dig sites have produced spear points nearly 2 feet long, crafted with a level of precision suggesting they were designed for hunting or warfare, not decoration. Experimental archaeologists agree that such massive points would require exceptionally long shafts and extraordinary strength to throw effectively. If normal humans didn't use them, then who were they meant for? Huge ceremonial masks. In several mound excavations, researchers found ceremonial masks far larger than a typical human face, some wide enough to cover an entire torso. Officially, these are interpreted as representations of deities or mythic beings. But many feature interior straps, grooves, or fittings, as if they were meant to be worn. The question lingers, worn by whom? Oversized sandals and moccasin impressions. Perhaps the most tangible clues come from reports of footwear impressions, sandals and moccasin-shaped outlines embedded in ancient clay deposits. Lengths measured between 15 and 18 inches, consistent with individuals well over 7 feet tall. Some prints show deep pressure points indicating heavy body weight. These impressions were often uncovered near old mound sites or river valleys associated with giant legends. Carved stone thrones too large for humans. Deep in the Wichita Mountains and along the Arkansas River region, researchers have documented carved stone seats with proportions that match someone significantly larger than an average adult. The leg rests, back angles, and seating dimensions all suggest they were intended for people at least 7 to 9 feet tall. Natural erosion doesn't explain their symmetry. Tribal traditions don't claim them. Yet they exist, and no one has an official explanation. What these artifacts suggest. Archaeologists often dismiss these anomalous objects as ceremonial pieces, artistic exaggeration, misidentified stones, ritual items unrelated to scale, but when viewed together, they paint a different picture, one that aligns disturbingly well with tribal legends and historical reports. These items were crafted with care. They were used, not just displayed. And they were meant for hands, feet, and bodies far larger than ours. The artifacts don't just hint at giants, they demand an answer. For more than a century, Oklahoma's strangest archaeological discoveries have shared a disturbing fate: they vanish. Bones disappear. Artifacts go missing. Excavation records fade into silence. And the stories of those who witnessed these finds survive only as whispers, half-forgotten tales passed down in families or buried in old newspaper archives. If the giant legends were isolated folklore, they could be dismissed. But when the physical evidence repeatedly disappears, the mystery deepens rather than dissolves. The Smithsonian shadow. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Smithsonian field teams conducted extensive excavations across Indian Territory. Though official reports describe normal-sized burials, many locals claimed differently. According to multiple town histories and personal letters, Smithsonian representatives allegedly collected unusually large skeletons, sometimes removing them within hours of discovery. Workers on these digs later recalled seeing bones, taller than any man in the county, packed into crates and taken east, never to be publicly catalogued. Official archives remain silent on these remains. Yet the pattern echoes similar stories across North America. Whenever giant skeletons were found, they were swiftly collected by institutions that then reported nothing anomalous. Private landowners and sealed mounds. Dozens of mound sites across Oklahoma sit on private property. Over the years, several landowners reported discovering oversized skulls, giant femurs, or strange burial chambers, only to quietly rebury them or seal off the mound entirely. In places like the Washita River Valley, Poteau Mountain, and the Red River region, families still tell stories of the huge bones Grandpa found, but were warned not to speak about. Some landowners feared government intervention. Others worried about legal complications. A few admitted they were simply frightened, unsure whether the discovery was archaeological, supernatural, or something in between. Excavation logs that suddenly end. Numerous early excavation notes from Oklahoma end abruptly. A site is described in detail up until the moment unusual finds appear, then the records stop, pages go missing, or reports resume with no mention of the anomaly. This occurred at several key mound sites, including lesser-known burial hills near Tulsa, Muskogee, and Fort Cobb. Researchers studying these archives decades later noticed the gaps immediately. Why do the logs end right when discoveries get strange? Towns with secrets they weren't allowed to keep across Oklahoma, from the Panhandle to the River Plains, elderly residents still recall the stories their parents told, the day the town found a giant skeleton, and the day someone came to take it away. In one town, a 9-foot skeleton uncovered in a churchyard was confiscated after a government representative threatened fines for tampering with archaeological material. In another, schoolchildren were shown a massive skull uncovered during a road project, until authorities abruptly seized it and warned teachers to stay quiet. One farmer displayed a giant femur in his barn for years before it mysteriously vanished after a visit from state officials. No official records mention these events. But too many communities carry the same memory for it to be coincidence. Why does everything keep disappearing? Archaeologists insist that giant stories are folklore or mismeasurements. Yet the repeated pattern of removal, secrecy, and missing evidence suggests another possibility. These discoveries did not vanish because they were unimportant, they vanished because they were too important. A race of large-bodied humans living in ancient Oklahoma would challenge current migration models, accepted indigenous timelines, long-standing assumptions about early North American populations, the idea that giants are purely mythological, and so, piece by piece, Oklahoma's giant evidence vanished, buried in sealed mounds, lost in basements, erased from reports, or spirited away by institutions that preferred a cleaner story. But the land remembers. And so do the people who saw what they were never allowed to keep. When you gather the scattered evidence, oversized burial chambers, enormous tools, tribal legends, old newspaper reports, and bones that vanished before they could be studied, one question overshadows them all: who were Oklahoma's giants? Archaeologists offer no official answer, but researchers, historians, and tribal storytellers have proposed theories that range from grounded to extraordinary. Each attempts to explain the same pattern: Oklahoma appears to have once hosted a population far taller, stronger, and more mysterious than any known culture in North America. 1. A pre-Mississippian race of tall agricultural peoples. The first theory suggests the giants were a pre-Mississippian civilization, an early, tall-bodied group who farmed the plains long before the Caddo or Wichita arrived. Evidence often cited includes large mounds predating known agricultural cultures, anomalous farming tools too big for average humans, legends describing tall people teaching early tribes agriculture. If true, this culture may have served as an early foundation for later mound-building societies, only to vanish through war, famine, or natural catastrophe. 2. Descendants of paleogiants, Ice Age survivors. Some researchers believe the giants may have been remnants of an ancient Ice Age population, possibly connected to tall, robust early humans who roamed North America during the Pleistocene. Their physical size may have arisen from high-protein megafauna diets, evolutionary adaptation to extreme climates, genetic lines unrelated to later Native American groups. This would explain why giant legends appear in tribes across the plains. The giants may have been the first people these cultures encountered when they arrived. 3. A warrior caste within early mound builder societies. An alternative theory argues that the giants were not a separate species, but an elite warrior caste within ancient mound builder cultures such as the early Caddo or Spiro-connected societies. Supporters point to oversized ceremonial weapons, giant effigies carved on conch shells at Spiro burial pits built for unusually large individuals. In this scenario, the giants were genetically rare but socially elevated, tall rulers, champions, or ritual leaders whose remains became legendary. 4. Migrants from ancient Central or South American giant traditions across the Americas. Giant myths appear with startling frequency: Maya legends of the Zot-Suminka, stories of the Huaracairi giants, Mapuche tales of the Pilan, Guarani legends of the Abaangui. One theory suggests long-distance migration routes may have brought tall-bodied peoples northward from Central or South America. Supporting details include Mesoamerican-style pottery motifs found in Oklahoma. Elongated skull reports resembling South American finds cultural parallels in sun worship and mound architecture. This theory proposes a forgotten northbound migration thousands of years before recorded history. 5. A mythologized but real population of tall individuals. The most conservative, yet still compelling, theory is that Oklahoma once hosted a real population of unusually tall humans, not giants in the mythic sense, but individuals consistently between 6'5" and 8 feet tall. These traits could have resulted from isolated genetic drift, founder effects, endocrine variations, environmental advantages over generations. These tall individuals became entwined with tribal myths until history blurred into legend. Global parallels that strengthen the mystery. Stories of giants aren't unique to Oklahoma. They echo across world cultures. Biblical giants such as the Nephilim, Medina giants reported in Ohio mounds, Patagonian giants described by 16th-century Europeans, Basque legends of the Gentilak, Norse tales of the Jotnar. The consistency across continents, tall beings building early structures, fighting ancient battles, teaching early humans, or vanishing mysteriously, suggests a deeper global pattern. If giants once lived in Oklahoma, they may have belonged to a widespread ancient population later absorbed, exterminated, or erased from historical record. A lost center of an ancient world. Taken together, the theories point toward a bold, tantalizing idea. Oklahoma may have been a major center of an ancient, tall-bodied population, a culture that influenced early tribes, shaped early mound-building traditions, and left behind only fragments before disappearing. Their bones may be gone. Their tools may be scattered. Their mounds may be eroded. But their legacy endures, in myth, memory, and the silent earth. If giants truly walked the plains of ancient Oklahoma, if their bones once filled oversized burial chambers and their weapons thundered across grasslands, then one haunting question eclipses all others: what happened to them? How could a population so physically dominant simply disappear? The clues, scattered through archaeology, oral tradition, and environmental history, point toward a disappearance that was not slow or gradual, but sudden, violent, or catastrophic, a vanishing written in broken mounds, abandoned settlements, and myths whispered through generations. Climate shifts, bodies too large for a changing world. Large-bodied populations require enormous caloric intake. As the climate warmed after the last ice age, Oklahoma's megafauna vanished, grasslands shifted, and food sources became less predictable. A giant people, once adapted to hunting massive animals or thriving in colder climates, may have struggled to survive. Environmental evidence shows periods of prolonged drought, sudden temperature swings, shrinking herds. A world that once supported giants may have simply become too small for them. War with incoming tribes. Nearly every tribe in Oklahoma preserves stories of battles against tall, powerful beings. The Osage speak of a war that ended the tall warriors. The Choctaw describe slaying the pale-skinned Naholo. The Comanche recall driving out the shining giants after brutal conflict. Archaeological evidence from certain mound sites reveals signs of burned structures, destroyed chambers, and burials done in haste, markers of warfare. These stories do not read like myth. They read like memory. Disease, the silent killer of isolated populations. Isolated groups are especially vulnerable to disease. A plague, even a localized one, could have wiped out a genetically tight-knit population of giants. If they lived in specialized communities, caves, or fortified settlements, one outbreak could have devastated them almost overnight. The sudden absence of tall remains in later mounds suggests an abrupt collapse, not a slow decline. Interbreeding that diluted giant traits. Some theories propose that giants never fully disappeared, they were absorbed. Interbreeding between the tall ancient population and incoming tribes would gradually eliminate extreme height traits through genetic mixing. Over time, the giants' descendants would appear indistinguishable from the tribes around them. This would explain why hints of unusually tall individuals appear in later burials. Giant legends persist, but giant bodies do not. Tools and weapons shrink in size over generations. The bloodline may still exist, even if the giants themselves don't. Catastrophic events, floods, fire, or famine. The plains of Oklahoma bear geological scars of sudden disasters, massive floods along the Arkansas and Red Rivers, firestorms sweeping across dry grasslands, droughts that lasted decades. A single regional catastrophe, or a series of them, could have annihilated communities of giants. Some mound sites show evidence of abandonment following violent environmental events, aligning with the possibility that nature itself dealt the final blow. Tribal myths of curses and sky wars. If scientific explanations whisper, tribal stories scream. Across Oklahoma, legends describe curses placed on the giants for arrogance or forbidden rituals, wars with sky people, beings of light or thunder, prophecies foretelling the downfall of the tall ones, a divine punishment for breaking ancient laws. These myths echo worldwide, stories of giant races destroyed by gods, floods, or heavenly battles. Myth or memory? Or both? A sudden and violent end. All evidence, archaeological, environmental, and mythological, converges on a single truth: the giants' disappearance was not gentle. It was abrupt. Something, or someone, erased them. Whether through war, climate, disease, genetic absorption, or a catastrophe lost to time, Oklahoma's giants vanished so completely that only fragments remain: oversized axes, enormous burial pits, tribal memories, and the silent earth that once held their footsteps. Their extinction is a story half told, and perhaps deliberately forgotten. As the sun sets over Oklahoma's endless prairies, shadows stretch long across the land, shadows that seem almost reminiscent of the towering figures once said to walk here. The rolling hills, the quiet riverbanks, the ancient mounds softened by centuries of wind and rain, all of them hold secrets too large to fit neatly within the boundaries of official history. For beneath the grasslands and red clay lies a deeper story, one written in oversized burial chambers, strange artifacts, tribal legends, and the fragments of bones that never should have existed. The giants of Oklahoma may be absent from textbooks, but their presence lingers everywhere the earth is disturbed. Every drought that lowers a river. Every construction project that cuts into an old mound. Every erosion event that reveals a fragment of something too large, too old, and too precise to belong to ordinary humans. Each discovery is like a whisper rising from the soil, a reminder that the land remembers what people try to forget. The Wichita, Osage, Comanche, Pawnee, and Choctaw did not invent their giant traditions out of thin air. Their stories hold an ancient rhythm, a shared memory woven across cultures long before Europeans arrived. Combine that memory with the oversized weapons, massive tools, strange thrones, lost skeletons, and abandoned chambers, and a startling possibility emerges: Oklahoma may once have been a stronghold of a tall-bodied people, a civilization whose height, strength, and mysterious disappearance left an imprint that still echoes across the plains. Why did they vanish? War, climate catastrophe, disease, or something more mythic? The truth remains hidden, perhaps purposefully, beneath centuries of silence. But silence does not erase reality. And buried history has a way of returning. As new technologies like LiDAR, ground-penetrating radar, and satellite imaging peel back the landscape, Oklahoma's ancient mysteries are resurfacing. What was once rumor is becoming evidence. What was once dismissed is gaining weight. And what was once buried may soon rise into the light. So the final question lingers like a tremor beneath the soil, a haunting echo waiting for an answer: maybe the giants didn't truly vanish. Maybe they're just beneath the next layer of earth, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover the truth.